$10.70 an hour. That is what non-tipped employees in Ohio are paid and expected to live on today. In this presentation, my goal is to highlight the issue that humans are expected to provide shelter, groceries, and necessities with a wage that is not enough for today's cost of living. Our gas prices are up, our taxes are up, and our prices in general have skyrocketed. Yet our minimum wage has not kept up at the same rate. In the article, Minimum Cash Wages, Tipped Restaurant Workers, and Poverty, evidence was shown that supported that raising the tipped minimum cash wage, like the non-tipped minimum wage, is a poor way to improve the economic well-being of poor Americans. Increasing the tipped minimum cash wage to $7.60 per hour, or even $15 per hour, will fail to help large segments of the working poor, including poor restaurant workers. Sabia Burkhauser, McKay, 2018. As for credibility, I am going to college so that I do not make minimum wage. I've had serving jobs where the tipped wage is $5.35, and I can personally tell you that it was not enough. Today, we will be addressing the issue itself and deep diving into minimum wage, how inflation has risen drastically more than the minimum wage has, and what we can do to combat this crisis. The problem. Those who are paid minimum wage cannot afford to live today, and it affects everyone. Though children aren't responsible for supporting a household, even their livelihoods are being affected by their parents' inability to support themselves, not by any fault of their own. In the article, Sport is Not a Luxury, written by O'Kane, McCafferty, Gallagher, Murphy, Fitzpatrick, and Carlin in 2025, the issue of cost of living was assessed in a survey. 855 parents and guardians over the age of 18 in Northern Ireland were questioned about their socioeconomic status and how their children were affected. For example, the majority of parents and guardians, 85%, agreed that sport and physical activity were important for the children to manage stress. However, 30% were unable to afford equipment and clothing that their children needed to participate in the sport or physical activity. More than a third of parents and guardians, 35%, had reduced spending on sport and physical activity because of the cost involved, and 24% of parents and guardians reported using credit or borrowing money to cover sport and physical activity costs. The perceived impact of the cost of living crisis on sport and physical activity opportunities for children varied by socioeconomic status. A greater proportion of parents and guardians with lower socioeconomic statuses reported reducing spending and borrowing money to cover the sport and physical activity related costs. This issue has spiraled to the point where even fun activities for children become stressful for their parents. We should not have to worry about cutting costs to make our children happy, but it is an unfortunate reality. Another example is Money Anxiety, Understanding Higher Education Students' Experiences of the Cost of Living Crisis, written by Dabrowski, Atas, Ramsey, and Howarth in May of 2024. The research was conducted on higher education students in Northwest England between 2022 and 2023. One thing the research found out was the inability to afford items deemed by students as necessary or essentials before the crisis extended beyond food products. Students revealed that they were not able to purchase seasonal clothing, basic footwear, necessities, subscription services, self-care products, or sometimes even underwear. College students, parents of children, and children themselves are all being affected by this wage war in multiple ways. Every person is being impacted by our outrageous cost of living in every part of the world, no matter the demographic, unless you're a billionaire with no worries. Now that we understand how some groups are being affected, let's discuss how, due to the rates of inflation, this catastrophe is only suspected to get worse. We thought inflation was bad during the COVID-19 pandemic, but in hindsight, today's economy has declined. In the article, The Cost of Living Crisis, We Cannot Ignore the Human Cost of Living and Poverty, published in 2022, Patrick and Pybus addressed the rising costs that were hiked tremendously in the 3-year global pandemic. Even before the pandemic, concerns had been raised by mental health care providers that changes the benefit system, as well as wider deprivation, were contributed to increased demand on services, a situation that seems only likely to worsen unless we act properly to support families now and in the future. Fast forward to today, and our mortgage rates have continued to increase, interest rates have gone up, and eggs were $12 a dozen only months ago. The gradual increase in our minimum wage has not been able to keep the pace with the accumulating inflation that has exponentially grown. As inflation rises, more organizations are forming to fight this political economic issue. Some organizations were founded on the principle of advocating for higher wages, like the National Employment Law Project, otherwise known as the NELP, or the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. There are plenty of groups out there trying to advocate for and solve this issue, but it's one that should not exist in the first place. At first, the minimum wage was created to protect workers from being paid next to nothing. In the Fair Labor Standards Act, a living document, the FLSA established a first federal minimum wage, the standard work week, overtime rules, and made most forms of child labor illegal. This law, in its own words, was designed to eliminate labor conditions detrimental to the maintenance of the minimum standards of living necessary for health, efficiency, and well-being of workers. 2015. Organizations like the NELP and the NLRB and so many more are working to turn minimum wage into what it once was, a livable wage. These organizations are fighting for us, and we can make an impact by supporting and researching them. In conclusion, this cost of living crisis is a humanitarian issue. We've reviewed our rising costs of living and our minimum wage that is not rising as quickly, the effect it has on everyone, and organizations like the NELP and the NLRB, which are working for us to help fight for fairer wages. This is a human issue, not just an economic one. Thank you.